Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Lottie. I'm a stained glass artist based here in the UK, and today I'm going to be doing a soldering tutorial video. So I'm actually soldering a commission piece. So this piece is now in its forever home, but I thought it would be really good to show this piece because it's actually quite difficult to solder. So it gives me a good way that I can show some little tips and tricks that I've learned over the years. Before I start, I really want to quickly mention PPE, and that's because when I first started out, I found so many mixed messages online about what to wear and what not to wear. I found it also really confusing. So I thought I'd share with you what I wear. So I've sort of found some mid-ground where it's comfortable for me. To start with, I wear one of these face masks. These are FFP3 NR filtering half face masks. These are sort of nice mid-range. They're comfortable to wear and they do the job. Next up is gloves. I actually wear two pairs of gloves. So I wear these ones because they stop any chemicals from getting onto my hands. The flux is quite a harsh chemical, so you definitely don't want to get that on your skin. And I also wear these high flex, they're just off Amazon. These offer me some heat protection when I'm touching the glass because the glass and solder gets really hot. And finally, and I think I'm probably the only person that does this, but I found when I was soldering, I was getting an oil residue on my skin from the vapors, and that got me thinking, if that's on my skin, that's also going to go on my hair. My clothes are fine because I always change my clothes, but I was worried about my hair, so I don't wash my hair every day and I don't want to have to wash it after every time I solder. So I wear disposable hair nets. I do wear these a few times. I don't use them just once and then chuck them away, but just a bit of added protection. So let's get into it. We're starting with our piece ready cut, round, soldered, painted and copper foiled. I'm actually using a black backed copper foil here because I plan to finish this piece in a nice black patina. Here I'm brushing over a liquid flux. So a flux is a solvent that's going to help clean the copper foil and just give a much better adherence with the solder. You can see here the tip of my iron, it doesn't look particularly clean and shiny, and what we want for a really nice soldering finish is a very shiny tip. So I'm just rubbing it here into a very old tin of tip tinner, and this just cleans the dirt off the iron and gives it a really nice silvery finish. And there is the nice shiny tip. The solder that I use is Artist Pure 6040, so this is 60% lead and 40% tin. I know lead is obviously a dangerous metal, but the reason it's used in stained glass art is because it has quite a low melting point and it's a nice soft pliable metal, but it's also firm enough to hold all the glass in place. And lead is something that is hazardous, yes, but it's only when it's been ingested. So as long as the stained glass piece isn't going to be used as jewellery or something that's going to be touched a lot of the time, it's perfectly safe to use lead. Sometimes I use push pins to hold the glass in place when I'm soldering it together, but here it's not particularly necessary. I only tend to do that when it's more of a difficult shape like a circle. So here I'm just dotting bits of solder on each of the joints, and that will be enough to hold the pieces in place while I start soldering. Whilst soldering, I do clean my soldering iron quite a bit, and that's what this damp sponge is on the side. It's a soldering sponge, and I just use it to wipe off any of the extra residue that's sticking to my iron. As for my actual soldering process, I am quite a slow worker. This was actually my first time using the clear iridescent glass that you can see, and it was incredibly rigid, and I found that my solder wasn't laying as flat as I'd like it to because it was getting caught in the ridges. So it took me a few tries on this to understand how to work with this new glass. But the great thing about soldering is that the process isn't permanent, and you can neaten and resolder as many times as you need to. You really just want to be cautious of overheating your glass, so avoid spending too long in any one section. The glass can crack, and trust me, I've done it multiple times before. It's an absolute nightmare. Sometimes when I feel like the solder isn't beading correctly, I'll do this technique of tapping the solder, and I find that this helps me to evenly distribute the solder into sections where I want it to go. This was especially needed because of the ridges in this glass. And here I'm intentionally not going all the way to the edge of the glass, well, failing a little bit on some of these edges. This is because I intend to use a lead came on this piece once I've finished soldering, and I don't want the solder to be in the way when I come to apply the lead came. I do often get asked what temperature I have my iron set to, and I find that there's actually lots of variables in this. So while soldering this piece, the room that I was in was actually really cold, so I had my soldering iron set to higher than usual. In a warmer environment, I find that I don't need my soldering iron quite as high, and if I do have it higher, it just tends to crack the glass or flood the solder. So I recommend starting off with a low temperature and then gently increasing the temperature so that the solder is melting comfortably with the speed that you're working to. Once I've finished soldering the back of the piece, I flip it over and do any finishing touches on the front. So as you can see here, these little blobs of solder, this is when I've flooded the back of the piece. These are really easy to get rid of. You just go over them with your soldering iron and they just melt back into the rest of the solder. There's something about freshly heated up solder that is just so shiny and so pure. I wish it could stay like that forever, but sadly once the metal solidifies you'll never ever quite get that shine. And with the extra bits of solder, I'm just popping them into my tip tinner lid just to get them out of the way. This is lead came. That's C-A-M-E, not cane. It took me a long time to realise that. So I like to use lead came because I find it's more flexible than zinc came. So a lot of these corners that I've got in this piece, it will nicely bend around them, and hobby cane tends to be a little bit smaller, which is ideal for sun catchers. So here I'm just measuring the lead came against my piece. So you can actually see here, I noticed that there was a little bit of like a bead of solder that was in the way, and it wasn't allowing my cane to sit flush to the surface. So all I did was applied a little bit of flux and just wiped that bead away. Really easy. But that is an example of when I went too close to the edge. And I do find attaching lead came is one of the trickier sides of soldering. It's actually my least favourite part of the whole process. I think it's because this is more of the technical side of measuring and aligning it and placing it perfectly, and that isn't particularly my style. So here I like to secure it into place, and then I want to hold it really tight, apply a little bit of flux, and then with my soldering iron I'll just use these residue bits of solder from earlier and apply a small bit of solder just to hold it in place. This bit's incredibly fiddly and the cane does get quite hot, so sometimes I'll wear finger protectors as well while I'm doing this. I have a little tip when it comes to cane. So I didn't discover this until much later on in my stained glass career. I could not get on with cane for the longest time. I could not understand why my solder wouldn't adhere to it. I was applying flux to it, I was using the right heat, but for some reason it would just never stick, and I found that it's because where you order the cane from, it can be sat in storage for quite a while, so then it's oxidised and dirt and residue and all sorts of stuff gets on the cane, and it just won't stick to the lead solder. So what I've started to do is, when I get my cane, I take a section out that I want to use for a piece, and I actually use wire wool and clean the entire length of the cane. And since doing that, I've found that the solder will stick to it really nicely. So for the jump rings, so I used to hate attaching jump rings. I could never get them to sit in the right place. The solder would melt and they'd fall off, and it was an absolute nightmare. Since I've started doing it this way, I find that it's so much easier to attach them, so hopefully this might help some of you as well. So the first thing I do is apply flux to the jump rings and the section that I'm going to apply them to. I've also turned my iron right down at this point. I think I usually have it set to about 360, 310. And this is a piece of spare glass that I've got, and it's quite a thin piece, so it's perfect for resting my jump ring on. And I also like to make sure that my jump ring, the opening for it is going to be sealed with solder, so there's less chance of it ever opening and the chain falling off. The pliers that I'm using, I know they are incredibly old. I have some new ones now. I do not use these old rusty ones anymore. They were a nightmare to use. I don't know why I stuck them out for so long. Anyway, so this is just me applying a small bit of solder, and you do almost want to flood it through because you want it to really melt onto that ring and melt through to the other side. Then once you've got it melted onto one side, you really simply, this time you don't want to flood it through, but you just pat the other side, and that's how easy it is. And that is the in-depth tutorial on how I solder. So that's my process. Again, it's an amalgamation of things that I've seen on the internet, on YouTube, TikTok, and also read from books. And so though this is my process, you may find that some stuff I do doesn't work for you and you have a different method entirely, and that is totally fine. As I said earlier on in the video, I don't have this piece anymore, so I'll add a finished shot so you guys can see what it looks like, all finished, patinaed and polished. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe. I will be bringing out loads more content, and yeah, thanks so much. I hope you guys enjoyed it.